Excellent. Oh yeah. So, where do we start? I still have lots of questions. Maybe let's start
Yeah,
from.
definitely. Actually, I was thinking about doing like Q&A session this like maybe this weekend or during the
Uh-huh.
week. I'm actually gonna do a pause today because I'm sure I haven't done it in a long time, and I think it was actually the most interesting part when it's like you really hear sort of opinions of people and what they don't understand or I don't understand, and it's really it's a kind of like a two-way street as opposed to when just video it's more like a one-way street. There is some feedback from the comments, but still it's not quite the same. I just so I'm just giving you a heads up. I probably will put the post actually Paul probably will do it right now as we speak. So
Oh, that's good. I
yeah,
do. I do like Q&A.
I think that's probably time for it. Okay, so
Hmm.
you fire away.
Okay. Yeah, Kharkiv counteroffensive or liberation. That was pretty amazing. Um, how would you rate it from Ukrainian perspective? Like, if you had to rate it from 0 to 10, how well was it executed, or how did it go?
So I didn't hear the name. What is the liberation of what you said?
Kharkiv
Oh,
liberation.
Kherson.
No, Kharkiv
No,
in
Kharkiv
September.
was never lost.
Okay, Izum,
Well, but was it okay?
Izum
Okay,
or
okay.
Kharkiv
I see what you
territory.
mean. You mean Balaklia, Kupiansk, and all of that.
Yep.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Hmm.
Yeah, all of that. I think, I think, and I'm sorry to spoil excitement, but it's more of a mistake of Russian side than Ukrainian success.
Hmm.
So it's very similar to what happened with Kiev, right? All of that, like northeastern part, where they left because they made mistake, and then they realized, okay, this doesn't work. We're gonna be like, you know, we're gonna die slowly but surely there. So we're moving away from here. So if you remember, end of March, literally like March like 28, 29, 30, as they withdrew from all of that northern part of Ukraine and northeastern part of the Ukraine. Not because Ukrainian military was great, was actually not that great. It was mostly because of the resistance of people. And what was great is on ordinary level, on a soldier level. You see what I mean? At the
Mm.
grassroots level, that was what eventually forced hands of Russia. And so if you remember, there were excellent opportunity to basically for Ukrainian military as a whole, as a system, to pursue retreating Russian troops, and nothing has been done. They essentially left in perfect, there were some minor things, but overall, for what it is, they left on, in perfect way. Let's put this way. And something similar happened this time. They overextended themselves. They didn't have enough people on the front line. Exactly the same as Kiev, and they had to leave. They had to leave, and they left more or less in pretty good way as well. Yeah, there were some abandoned equipment. Some lost. Some small scale units that got trapped and stuff like that. But there's not also enough detailed information what was happening there in that whole area. But I would say it's not a sign of Ukrainian superiority. It's a sign of you know Russian military makes mistakes, but eventually it sort of fixes them,
Mm.
which is not a good sign, by the way, for Ukraine.
Yeah.
But it's great, great stuff. Ukraine liberated territory, so there's nothing. I'm for it. Like similar to Kherson, right?
Hmm. There
I'll
was.
probably preempt your question about Kherson. The same story there. The same story. Ukrainian, military was hitting the wall, bleeding itself wide, like losing a lot of people, human lives. Ukrainian soldiers could not do anything. The only reason it was done is because the bridges were, the logistics was impaired through the Pro River, thanks to HIMARS rockets, and that's pretty much it. That's
Mm.
very, again, not because Ukrainian military, and I'm talking about as a system, as a Ukrainian military command, all of that. Not because they're great. No, they're terrible. It happened because, Ukraine got lucky and got those HIMARS rockets from the US. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If they were not destroyed, those pontoon bridges, those, ferries and all that stuff, they would still be there. And partially, they also overextended themselves there as well. Not in such a bad shape as they used to be, like in Kharkiv, what you call Kharkiv, but they still, they already started fixing their mistake, right? They announced this mobilization. What was it like? Last days of September, I think, like around like September 25th, plus minus a couple days in either direction. And so they're fixing their mistakes. They slow at fixing them, but they eventually do. And so that's a big sort of challenge and problem for Ukraine, because Ukraine I don't see any learning on Ukrainian command side of anything. All they do is just primitive attacks in a World War I style that lead to like high losses on Ukrainian side and no results. And so Ukraine cannot win the war that way, simply because Ukraine is 3.5 times smaller population-wise than Russia. And now it's even, well, I guess there is a lot of refugees and stuff, but most of them are women. But still, there's a lot of sort of, all of them. So what I'm trying to say, Ukraine has to fight through quality, not quantity. And right now, Ukrainian leadership tries to fight through quantity, and it's not going to work.
In Kharkiv,
that's a big problem.
region.
And I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. As long as there's people in charge of the country, they will continue this failed approaches, unfortunately.
Near Izum.
Sorry if I'm like being very. Doesn't. By the way, so just to make sure, it's not like I'm, depressed or negative or whatever. Because some of the comments there, it's actually the point is to acknowledge mistake and fix mistake, right?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah,
I'm trying to do, just to people acknowledge their mistakes and hopefully they fix them. That's not. I'm super positive, right? Because otherwise I would just go die if I'm thinking like this is hopeless and stuff like that.
In a way, not addressing the Ukrainian shortcomings is doing exactly Russian mistakes, not learning from mistakes. But now Russia is learning from mistakes. It looks like.
No, they are. They very slow, but they are, and that's what I'm saying. I want to highlight this. That look, they may not be quick learners, but eventually they will. They do. And Ukrainian side never does. So even from this perspective, this is gonna lead to disaster. Do you see what I mean? You don't need to know much just to kind of realize, okay, Ukrainian, and I'm saying like by Ukrainian side, I mean leadership, right? Both military and political leadership. And honestly, I don't have hopes that they will ever win. This is like, like people raised in a Soviet system, they just don't see anything differently. This is just, it's like a, like asking blind person to see things. They will never be. It's like, or as they say, pigs don't fly. You know what I mean? They will never change. They will eventually will be replaced if this war continues, because there will be a lot of negative results that will lead. And that's why I mentioned about this 1917 moment in Ukraine and both Russia. They both going to that. When it happens, nobody knows. But if this continues, eventually they will get both to that moment.
When you say 1917 moment for each country, it could flip either direction. Is that right? It could get
who knows? Yeah, that's another big problem. That could go really bad and wrong. You know what I mean? Like how it was with Russian Empire. It went horrifically horrible. We in a way, you can even think that what is happening right now is legacy of that 1917.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like this is still basically, like if you track it down, this is sort of problem that hasn't been resolved since then, and in a way will live into like what we have been passed by our grandparents and parents. We basically trying to resolve in a horrific way all of those problems that like first were attempted to be resolved in 1917, and the attempt was a complete failure. They actually multiplied the problems, created more problems than existed before 1917. So yeah, it doesn't mean that it can go in a definitely positive way. And that's why I'm talking to, like, so people aware, so people, you know, when that moment comes, there will be some people who prepared and know what to do, so they don't allow this 1917 go in a bad way.
Yeah, I don't think many people have this grand idea, or most people just want the war to stop and go back to normal, and just
Yeah,
just make it stop.
yeah, but hey, but I'm not, I'll be honest with you, that's not, first of all, it's not my audience. It's not the people who I, kind of talk to when I do my videos.
Mm-hmm.
I do realize that people who I talk to in a very small minority of the population in general, but on the positive side, it's always minorities that do changes in society. Majority always kind of like wants to sit on the couch and watch TV and do nothing in their lives. Because if you look even like the communists in the Russian Empire, they were like super small organization. They had like 5,000 people when they did, like, let's say 1917. They had like maybe 10,000 people. That's it for entire Russian Empire.
Hmm.
Like, so it kind of gives you idea how, like, but they were super aggressive. They knew what they're doing, and they had no limitations at what they will do to achieve their goals. And that's why they won relative to anybody else. And they had positive idea. Well, at least it was a lie, but people were too uneducated to understand that that's a lie. It's in a way kind of like what we call right now populist idea, right? It's a lie, but people too uneducated to understand that they present it with a lie, that it's impossible to achieve. But for them, it's like a fresh new idea, and they follow it, and they do it, and so that's what we got. Like, that's the world we inherited as a result of all of that.
Do you see in Ukraine, like, is there a core like movement? Um, like, is there new ideas popping up for future? Is there activists trying to change things? Do you see like a big movements?
I wouldn't say so at large scale. No, it's right now. It's really like everybody is sort of like focused on fighting and survival. So I wouldn't say, and I don't think there will be any kind of like big movement like the way we sort of, we kind of like taught or whatever. Like, I think that's what people saying, it's going to be like some kind of big movement and it will come and it change. No, if you look at like, again, going back to that 1917 and the communists, they were like unknown in the society at large at the beginning. They were totally marginal, not known, like the same as Nazis at first. They were totally not known, and something like this will happen. Probably that's what my analysis tells me, that it never happens through this kind of like some big, huge movements where everybody involved. No, because I said majority doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to change. Basically, it just wants to sit on chair on the couch and watch TV and and have their food or whatever. That's all the like majority wants. They don't want they want status quo to preserve, but it will not be preserved because there is no resources to preserve in the system, in the economy. So as a result, there will be basically this whole, basically the objective circumstances will force countries in much worse situation, where it will force some people who will, to come up with ideas, and then push those ideas. Whether those ideas going to be good or bad, that's another question. But it will happen in a sort of forced way. If it doesn't, if there's nobody there with ideas, it may turn into Somali or Somalia in English, right? That's what's there. It doesn't mean that there is, like as you said very correctly, that doesn't mean there is a positive solution. There's a negative solution as well to the problem. And hopefully it doesn't go that way, because that would be, very depressing, let's put it this way. So I do hope it doesn't go that way. That's all I can say.
Like in 1930s, during the Spanish War, people didn't expect for another decade of fighting. They expected,
well,
like,
I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I don't have enough in-depth information there about Spain, to be fair, to kind of like say something. Well, I have enough at the very core what was going on there. So like, for me it's, but I would say this, from what I know, the country was going to civil war, even already in like early 30s. Because what I read, there was already basically this left government that was doing like repressions, killing some people who they didn't like. And so, eventually that leads to civil war. And so that blew up in 36. So, just, I'll be honest with you, like, when people say like, okay, it's all, unexpected, sudden, and like some kind of black swans. No, it's not true. If you really pay attention and you're not trying to be like, oh, everything's great, then you really realize like things are going in the wrong direction, and eventually they resolved. So all of these conflicts, whether it's civil war or war between the countries and so on.
Yeah. If I was really harsh, I'd say Ukraine had 30 years to sort the country out, and they failed. On the other
In a
hand,
way, you're right. I hear you. I cannot, I cannot say much against it. I would say one thing, that Ukraine was so, I would say, brutalized by the Soviet system, that it's almost like was in 91, it was unrecognizable as Ukraine. So it does take a lot of time to heal from that, from those wounds. It's almost like Ukraine was almost dead, and in 91 was just kind of like by sort of gift of nature, fortune, that it become independent. But as a nation, it was close to be dead because of the policies of the Soviet Union. I mean, not only in Ukraine, everywhere, but in Ukraine, it went quite far. Let's put this way.
And Russian influence was always there since the 90s. So did Ukraine actually have a chance?
Since what, you're breaking up a little bit. I don't hear very well. Like,
okay.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Sorry.
Breaking up.
So Russian influence was always there since 90s. Like, did Ukraine even have a chance to break out from Russia?
No, was not without this kind of situation, but not without war. Because Ukraine was always, basically what happened in 91 is KGB agents got into power in Ukraine, right? And they were running Ukraine for, in a way, this is kind of like and this is probably very difficult to even understand to like people more in the West, but I know you're not totally from the West, so you may be able to understand it. They don't like it. It's like they want to kind of like, how to say, become of the leaders of the process in order to lead the process into that end. So they become sort of like the political top in the country. So all kind of parties, all this, but they were doing the same thing. The idea was to basically economically destroy the country from within to destroy people's, how to say, face that they can self-govern themselves. And so they were like passing all kind of laws that like don't make any kind of sense. If you try to kind of like fulfill those laws, you're going to be dead, literally dead. Essentially, they were calling like, okay, give everything you have and you have nothing essentially, and you die. And you're not going to get anything from, I wouldn't even say I would expect anything from the government, but essentially they passed the laws that made it impossible for Ukraine population to succeed. So it turned into like non-stop economic depression for at least like 10 years. Since 91, it was till 2001. It started really recovering in 2002, not because of they changed the policies, but because in the West, Federal Reserve started flooding, the world with a lot of liquidity, basically unbacked credit, and that has raised the prices of commodities. So there will be a lot of money started flowing into the country just because the prices for commodities were like high. And so from 2002 till 2008, it was sort of like kind of like a mini boom in Ukraine. Not because of these people, and these people were looting, like try to steal to themselves as much as possible from this boom. Then in 2008 it stopped, and sort of, then it's downhill till 2014, and then since 2014 it's even more downhill. Then this Zelensky came in 2019, the same was going downhill. So you understand, Ukraine, one of the few countries of the former Soviet Union that is never was able to get back to their GDP level that was in 1991. So Ukrainian GDP before, I'd say, war, or before 2014, was about 60% of GDP of 1991. Most countries, former Soviet countries, actually managed to get above that level, 1991. So just so you understand, like, how terrible it must be. Like, basically, it was non-stop depression in Ukraine from 1991 till the war, with the exception of that short period, 2002, 2008. That's it. Those short 6 years, and even then, the really boom was like 2005, 6, 7, 8. So just short 4 years. And that's it. The rest was total, like, and it is still ongoing economic disaster.
I remember 90s in Estonia, and it was pretty rough. And if that's what it was, yeah, I remember 90s in Estonia, and it was pretty rough. And if that's what it was in Ukraine for 30 years, then I can see why people are not happy.
Right. That's essentially more or less. And so for that reason, and then how people adjusted to this is actually like starting from about 2001, 2000, a lot of people started leaving the country and, moving, whatever, to Europe, to, Australia, where you are, to the US, Canada. Basically, Ukraine lost, so you understand, Ukraine lost about before 20 I would say 2014, Ukraine lost from about 7 to 8 million people of its population. So it used to be in 1991 it was 52 million. 2014 or 2013 it was, and it's also, there's no actually how to say censuses. So it was like the official number 45. I think it was less. It's probably 43. So Ukraine lost almost like close to 10 million people over that 20 years span. Now it's even less than that. Now it's like, I don't know, 25 million people. So the population kind of like halved of Ukraine. So you understand, like, it is like absolutely like tragedy, I would say, and drama that's been happening in Ukraine since 91. In it only goes worse and deeper so far. but there is hope now, because before this was that situation where it's like there's no hope and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, because people just want to sit and they okay with the status quo. And eventually you see, like, the status quo get disrupted because Russia became like, they felt it's easy prey, right? It's Ukraine become as easy prey because it's so weak, it's so kind of like rotten, and all of the bad stuff that's been happening there. And they got they totally misunderstood the people. And that's what I'm saying, that's all about people. It's nothing to do with Ukrainian political top or military top. They are actually negative for the country. They're not they're actually the reason why Ukraine's still um, suffering mightily. But eventually they will change, or Ukraine will die, so there's no other way. It's like a sink or swim moment for Ukraine right now. And it's becoming more and more towards this critical moment where it really has to swim or it will sink.
Yeah.
Unless there's another thing that Russia is also going to its own 1917 moment. If that blows up there sooner than in Ukraine, Ukraine might be saved for, well, not like saved, but like this dysfunctional system might be able to continue itself for another 5-10 years before it will anyways blow up one sooner or later. But it may still exist in that shape, in that like ugly shape it's been existing since 91.
You mean Russia
No,
or Ukraine?
Ukraine.
Oh, okay.
Ukraine.
I see.
What Russia happens, I like uh all I can say that it's also going to 1917 as well. It just unclear to me right now who's gonna get there first. I thought initially Ukraine, just because it's smaller system, so it usually gets smaller system has less resources, so usually that happens there sooner. But we'll see. Russia, it looks quiet, but it may blow up. Like in 1915 and 14, it was also quiet in the Russian Empire. They were all marching and supporting the emperor, but then in 3 months, as everything turned into a completely different story. So what's gonna happen there is, we'll see. There's no, I don't think there's any like good way to predict anything what's going to happen, but always just know directionally where everything goes. Let's put it this way.
Yeah. Another thing is
Sorry, I was
maybe
talking too much, but like
no,
now
that's fine.
I'll try to talk less.
No, that's fine. It's the cultural thing as well. I'd like to talk about like West and
Yeah, whatever you
and
want.
and Russia. What I say is both sides view each side as their own. Like West assume Russians are like Westerners, and Russia assume West thinks like Russians. Do you agree with this, or what's your opinion?
Say it again. West thinks that Russians thinks like West. Is that right?
Yeah. What I mean is like when West put sanctions on Russia, assuming Russian citizens behave like Westerners, they don't they start protesting on the street and push the government over like
Oh,
over.
I see what you mean.
And
Yeah.
I
So
think
I agree with you. Yeah, go ahead.
and Putin seems to think the same way, like or not just Putin, but Russians view West same way, like it's like a mafia state basically in West.
Yeah, it is mafia state. That is, you describe it, because if you really think, and actually very good point you're making, because communists, right, that came into power in 1917, it was mafia. It's organized mafia that was financed through from actually West, misguidedly, but it was mafia. And so they installed mafia state. Like Soviet Union was a mafia state, and Russia inherited that, and it is mafia state. And that's why I'm saying that Ukrainian top right now is also part. It's just a branch of mafia state. So in a way, think about this: you have a king, like a feudal times. You have a king who is mafia, and then it has vassals who are mafia, like who are running the branches of that kingdom. And Ukraine was like all of this Ukrainian top is those vassals and part of this mafia. So that's why, yes. So could not agree more. It was so spot on.
Mm-hmm. And to me, it seems like Russians or a Russian president assume West is run the same way, like it's just a one big mafia state, and and America is running Ukraine.
Do you want me to answer that, or this is so you have more of the question?
If you have some like opinion on that, or if not, then that's
Oh
fine.
yeah, I have an opinion. So yeah, I mean, definitely US is trying to use Ukraine for its own purposes, right? It's never, if people say, oh, we just want to like help Ukraine, that's obviously not true. US is helping Ukraine because it's pursuing its own sort of goals and and its own agenda. So in that way, it tries to influence Ukraine and kind of like turn Ukraine in its own puppet, right? At the same time, the interest of both aligned because Ukraine wants to survive, and Ukrainian population. That's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about Ukrainian leadership. So it's in a way kind of like alliance, like where Ukraine is forced to, out of desperation, is like, okay, we're gonna be a little bit of your puppet because otherwise we're gonna be dead. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there's not many of it, not much, because all of this mafia, Ukrainian like top, which is mafia, let's call it directly, it's mafia. They completely destroyed country from within. So there's no, production facilities. Everything is controlled. So you cannot start like, manufacturing even weapons to self-defend. So you have to go to the West and to US and beg for weapons, and nobody gives you that stuff for free. They demand sort of some favors in return.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot of that. From that perspective, there's a lot of meddling, US meddling in Ukraine, because there is almost like a cottage industry of all of this so-called fake activists that are being funded by the US in Ukraine. And they do a lot of harm to Ukraine, actually, because what they do, they don't allow local activists to actually rise up.
Oh, I see.
Because locals, they don't have money, and these people are being funded like with a lot of US money, and they just push US agenda. They push whatever is in interest of, and most of it is, to be fair, Democratic Party. That's who does it, US Democratic Party. That they basically fund it, and so this what's that called, US AAD, I think, something like I forgot the name of it. Department of State, all of that. So there is that going on, but the thing is that what is probably US doesn't realize, or those people, they don't care basically, is that majority of population is sort of like foreign to those ideas that are being pushed on them. So they don't really share what's being pushed on them by the Democratic Party, basically. Because it's all leftist idea. But by leftist, I mean, I would say totalitarian collectivism and all of that, and it's totally foreign to Ukrainian population, because it's extremely individualistic. It's basically a totally different side of the spectrum than what these people. So basically, that's really what's happening, and what this gives a lot of armor to Russian side to blame. Oh, Ukraine is just is a puppet, it's not independent state. And so it looks credible to many people in the West because they understand this internal deep dynamic, that's what's happening there, because they don't care about Ukrainian society. For them, it's just another object in the world. So they don't have interest to actually even learn the society, to understand what drives society. So they basically consume this Russian propaganda that, like, okay, Ukraine is just a puppet of the US and things like that, which is not true. But at the same time, there's a lot of US influence that, as I said, is harmful to Ukraine, to Ukrainian future. And the same from European Union, by the way. They're just not as aggressive in pushing their sort of agendas, values, whatever. They basically don't want to spend as much money as, let's say, US. US is much more willing to spend money on sort of social. I'll call it social engineering.
Okay.
And they've been doing that's not Ukraine is not unique. They do it everywhere in the world, right? They and at the same time, it's kind of funny because they fail everywhere in the world and they keep doing it.
So, okay, I follow up from the last question. So US been financing wars or been supporting wars for a long time and failing, from Vietnam, Middle East. Is it
Yeah.
different? Is it different
Yeah.
this time? And now having support of the people, because that's a big difference.
Well, yes, it is different, right? Because in a way, as I said, that's why it worked for the first time in a while for the US, because in a way, what happens with the US is they are extremely blind. They just don't care about the world so much. They just assume that, like, okay, we go there and everybody's gonna support us. They don't, in a way, they don't respect the other people, like other nations of this planet. Do you see what I mean? And because they so arrogant, and so they just go and throw this money and try to kind of go blindly without even understanding the people on the ground and their desires. And so they've been failing. I think the only last sort of non-failure was really South Korea. I would say that was the only one that's not non-failure. And then the rest of it is since like 53 was all failures.
Yeah.
Up until Ukraine, and this is by accident, not because they were changing their mind, they started thinking, they tried to understand others or whatever. No, it was just basically randomness, right? You do, like it's like a throw the coin up, eventually you'll get it right. And so this is the situation when it kind of like interest of Ukrainian population and citizens, that's what I want to highlight, not Ukrainian top, which, as I said, is a part of this, I call it Soviet communist mafia. The same as the Russian regime is part of that Soviet communist mafia. I'm talking about Ukrainian citizens, and their interest is aligned with the US or with the West in general, that they don't want to be like living in the mafia state anymore. And in a way, you can even say that this war is about, the headquarter of the mafia state is saying, no, you're not going to be separating from us because we're scared that the rest of the mafia state will start falling apart. Like you can have like sort of chain reaction of uprisings in other parts of the mafia state because they see that there is success case, right, for them. So and so yeah, but Ukrainian population is Ukrainian population is basically fighting for its own survival. That's all. So I don't know. So in other words, where there is a difference from Russian propaganda, where they say, oh, they just using Ukraine to destroy Russia. So this is again deeply flawed thinking, because again, the Russia, leadership is not respecting the same way as US, will or other nations. Do you see what I mean? And so that's like this blindness leads them to all of this led them into this bad situation for Russia, because situation for Russia is bad as well. Like, Ukraine is in horrible, but Russia is in pretty bad situation too. It's not like it's going well there.
Yeah. Okay. Ideal case, what would happen? Like, let's say next 12 months, if things go excellent for Ukraine. What would these steps be? How would you see things change for Ukraine favor?
And this is just
hypothetical.
wishful thinking at the same time.
Yeah.
It's going to be wishful thinking, but because I don't see this as happening, maybe by sort of accident, or maybe things will change and people sort of like wisen up and realize that they need to change this mafia top. But what I think the ideal situation would be is Russia eventually gets weak enough internally, not because on the front line, that they decide to withdraw from Ukraine. Just decided to like, okay, we'll have peace, but we keep Russia as a whole because there will be threat of internal sort of civil war there. So they basically withdrew from Ukraine, like from the entire Ukraine, including Crimea. And maybe Ukrainian part will give concession to Russia saying, okay, we're not going to be part of EU, we're not going to be part of NATO, we're just going to be independent state. And that would be the bad, and even I would say even more, and we don't really need any reparations for the damage that's been done from Russia.
Wow.
And I would say that would be the I would say the best outcome for Ukraine, basically at this point, because Ukraine, there's no way like this is wishful thinking, but like saying that Ukraine is gonna win, meaning like military wise push Russia out of like completely and even get into Russian territory is insanity. It's just like this is just not happening. Ukraine's so far away from being, skilled, well organized army that in many ways it's unfortunate, it's sad, but it's think about this, like in feudal times, Ukrainian army is like a best peasants army, just bunch of peasants, with very light weapons. They fighting sort of like feudal, but the only advantage that there is a lot of peasants, and sometimes this time the peasants also giving some dangerous weapons that can hurt feudal, right? So that's what really like right now Ukrainian army is. And so that army will never be able to sort of, truly achieve things, remarkable things on battlefield, let's put this way.
Yeah, I was hoping there's big changes happening in the background, in the secrecy, but it doesn't look like.
No. It's that really needs to, that like top needs to change. You cannot make any changes without changing top. And like there's a saying, fish always rots from the top, right? So unfortunately, we'll live in extremely centralized states, like all of us, doesn't matter west or east. East is even more centralized. So in many ways, people at the bottom level super disempowered to make any real changes. So as a result, there is no way any kind of changes are happening in background or anything like that. No. There's like those people, even mentally, who like this mafia people that run Ukraine, they even mentally not there to do anything like what you're saying. Like it's for them, it's like flying to the moon. It just like the IQ is not there to do anything like that. Do you understand what I mean? Just mental capacity is simply not there.
Yeah,
their best like sort of achievement is their view is you know what, we don't like to be slaves of Russia, let's just be slaves of EU, basically. That's just what they're really thinking is in that, so we're going to get money from the West, we're going to steal some of that money, and we're just going to be protected by the West. That's just their right now mental sort of like framework of how their vision of how they want it to be.
And to change that, so does Ukraine need to fail more? Like,
correct. That is correct. So in a way, it's like was how Lenin was. The failure is well, he was evil, but he understood how the things happen, and he said the worse it is for the Russian Empire, the better it is. And unfortunately, it's not that I wish that, but the country needs to go through more pain to change, really. And that's what like life is doing to Ukraine right now. So, if Ukraine didn't learn the lesson in a sort of peaceful way, then it gets, it's learning lessons in very painful way. There's a lot of, dead people. There's a lot of deaths there, and unfortunate. But if you don't learn, that's what happens to you.
Unfortunate. Yeah.
Yep, it's unfortunate. It's sad. I'm not saying like, hey, I'm for it, but okay, it's not like I also can change it. It's just I'm in a way like, like observer from, outside observer that's seeing this, and I'm like, wow, when people will finally wisen up and change, how many more deaths needs to happen,
With all this
So that's
negative.
kind of like, it is kind of like, I'm not saying it's negative, like it's okay, it's lie, like,
Uh-huh.
I'm not. mm, I'm not saying it's negative. It's it is like you just realize this is life, and
Hmm.
you do your best what you can, because obviously you know cannot change direction of Ukraine at the moment. So I do my best. I make these videos to educate people, and hopefully there's more intelligent people there, and hopefully it pays off. It's like you throw the seeds, and hopefully there will be harvest down the road. You never know, but that's all I can do, right?
Hmm.
So I do, at least I'm honest to myself. um
Yeah. But there has been, if you look at the big picture, uh, in the big picture, last 9 or 10 months, how long it's been now, it the war
yeah, I
been
think it's nine
different.
months at this point.
It's been different from what anyone really expected. Like there has been some significant is a victory for Ukraine, but successes like Kerch Bridge, that was long-awaited destruction. Kerch Bridge is out of action. Well, as of
Yeah,
now, still. Kherson liberation, Izum liberation, well, Snake Island liberation, and mostly Russian
but you
failing.
have to understand, but what I would say, that was failings of the Russia, right? It wasn't like Ukrainian side knew what they were doing, and it was carefully planned, and it was controlled by Ukrainian side, and it was driven by Ukrainian side. No, it's not. It's more like a Russian side failed miserably in their endeavors, and Ukrainian side simply came and took advantage of that in a way. Do you see what I mean? It's
Mm-hmm.
not. So that tells you that in a way they won. Ukraine won by luck to extent, not by luck, but like because your opponent made stupid mistakes, and so you just you don't need to do anything. You could be totally incapable, and you're still gonna win just because your opponent is terrible as well, by the way. And but they do learn, as I said from the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do agree with you that is nobody expected that Ukraine will last for 9 months, and it's not like it's done. It looks like it's gonna last for a while, and who knows? And there's a good chance Ukraine may win in this war. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying like, oh, Russia is guaranteed to win, because Ukraine is still getting support. Things in Russia getting bad. Uh, it's not like Russia is guaranteed to win. It has a lot of potential to win, but it's not able to fully realize its potential as well to win. So the fight is not like a very clear one, like, okay, Russia is guaranteed to win. Um, so, but I'm going back to this thing, is like why Ukraine is able to hold on, is because population, citizens want to sacrifice themselves. They not, you know, uh, how to say, and I think that's probably different from many Western even countries, in my opinion, these days, where people feel that they are owners of their country. And I feel like in the West, it's also this, and used to be like that in the West as well. But over past whatever, I don't even know how many years, let's say, I don't know, 100 maybe years, in the West, slowly, sense of ownership in anything has been destroyed and removed. And people don't view themselves as owners, but more like a users or renters of everything, including their own countries. They don't feel strong ownership of their own countries anymore, where they just see themselves just as, and maybe Estonia is not the case from what I see. In my view, Estonia is not the case, and probably Latvia and Lithuania not the case, like Poland is not the case, or like that. But if you go more like sort of really west, like UK, France, Germany, US, Canada, in my view, there's no ownership there. It's a renter mentality. Like, how can I get whatever I need and not to sacrifice anything? And they project their views on Ukraine, right? So that's how they would do, basically. And so for them, it's very surprising, because their worldview is very different, actually, from Ukrainian worldview, for that matter, and from the worldview of, let's say, Polish, from Estonians, from Lithuanians, Latvians, right? So these are countries where I'd still say there's a strong ownership sense in ordinary person. I'm not talking about like the tops. I'm saying like average person on the ground. And that really sense of ownership means that people willing to die for what they own. This is where the difference is, where it's coming from. Because renters, they will never die for anything. They're just gonna flee to better, rented place. That's it. And that's what you see a lot discussions in, like, let's say, in the US, people not rooted in the US. And the same in the UK. I think in Germany is becoming much more like that. In Canada, I don't know enough about Australia, so I cannot speak, but I would assume something similar is there as well. So maybe Japan is, for example, another one where there is a strong sense of ownership. And I would say also probably South Korea in the Western world. So as you can see, Western world is also not very uniform. It's actually very heterogeneous in many ways. There's significant differences even in the Western world.
I'm also a little bit surprised about the pace of the progress. To me, it seems very quick progress in the battlefield. It almost looks like it's the phase, if you compare it to World War II, as Germany is bombing London with V2 and V1 rockets out of desperation. That's the phase we are now. But it seems like very, very quickly things have changed. Do you agree?
And by that, you mean like what things change? Because I'm actually not seeing that. So, tell me where things are changing quickly. Because I'll be honest with you, I don't see them changing quickly.
Okay.
Then you tell me, give me examples so I understand better.
So at first, of course, Russia made big progress in the battlefield, and then there was stagnation for a few months, and then there was reversal. Ukraine had initiative for a few months, but during World War II, for example, it took couple years, or at least a year, for the reversal to happen, and it took years for things to change. But now it seems like Russia is already low on munition, and Russia seems to be struggling. Or is it just the false? What I'm trying to say, Russia is not as depleted as it seems to be.
I don't think I don't see that this quick. I would say we need to then look in a relative sort of scale, because if you think about World War II or World War I, the resources is so much more, that like number of people, it was like what, like at least 4 million, not at least, but about like 4 million in the German army and about like 6, 7, 8 million in a Soviet army. So think about that. Like the amount of resources that were involved is so much different versus here. Russian army at the beginning was what, 200,000. Ukrainian was whatever, let's say 250 at the beginning, then mobilized another, let's say 200, 300. But it's not anywhere close to, what what Germany had or what Soviet Union had. So it's it's much smaller amount of resources on each side. So you burn through resources in much faster pace, right? So that's why it looks like it's faster, but it's only because you have, in the first place, fewer resources and you burn through them, because, if you have less, and let's say you assume speed of burning is the same, then you're obviously going to get through to the end, in this case, faster. So that's how I would think about this. I don't see it as any like fast. No, I mean, I would say, it's, look at what's going on. It's just like, certain areas, things are just like static for months, for like really months. Like the Zaporizhia front line, it's since April, really, it's static there. And even like, this is when the Russian last attempt that they were not successful, but really it's static from, let's say, I would say mid-March is there, even early March, static, right? Like Kherson was static essentially since obviously early March, right? Or even from February, just like Russian side abandoned it because they couldn't, there is logistical problem. Situation around Kyiv was static. It's just that they decided to abandon because they didn't have enough resources and they were slowly like, slow melting ice cube, as they said before then. The same, happened in Kharkiv, where they actually decided not to withdraw on time, and they were pushed by Ukrainian side, but they still managed to withdraw sort of intact, more or less. So, I wouldn't say it's, the things are, I'm looking at this like, Bakhmut and Popasna. Popasna is not far away. Lysychansk is not far away, and it's just the fighting is being going on in this small area all since like early March, right? Like, because Popasna from Bakhmut is probably like 20 kilometers. That's it. So you spend 9 months, you know, getting, claiming 20 kilometers in depth. I'm not talking about the width, but in the depth. I mean, I can look it up right now. It's not much. I mean, it's close to 20 kilometers plus minus. It's not a huge distance. So like, I'll tell you, like maybe it's even less. We'll see. But it's look. So I'm measuring distance from Popasna to Bakhmut. Let's say, it's 24 kilometers. So think about that. So they spend like what, 9 months to basically move by 24 kilometers. It's World War I even. It's not even war. Like, I would say the whole war right now reminds much more turning into World War I than even World War II. World War II was a very dynamic situation. This one is really like slow motion, terrible, terrible, not terrible, I don't even know what to say, but slow motion, that's for sure.
I guess that's what in a way, that's what I mean. Like when Russia ran out of steam so quickly, and um, and had no other option, or last resort was to start bombing electricity infrastructure. This is like what Hitler was doing in late war. Starts terrorizing London with its rockets.
But I think it's much better strategy. Russia has much better strategy and it works. Versus for Hitler, it did not work. I would not say that they're stupid. This is actually like, this is how I guess it's how it's viewed in the West, in sort of like, oh, this is just idiot in front of us and they're just idiots. Versus I disagree. And I would say the way I view it, they finally fixing their mistakes. So they're actually learning. This is actually a sign of them learning, because, you know, in this war, they should have done this at the very beginning, you know, in February, March, and they probably could have, you know, conquered Ukraine if they did it at the very beginning, because the amount of the sort of shock that was significant. If they hit this all you know, all of that, that would put total chaos in Ukrainian is on Ukrainian side, and they could have won that. But they learned, and they learned too late, slow, but they are learning, and they're changing, and they're doing now different things, right? Because that's on, to be honest, that is actually mm, actually correct strategy if you don't want to kill too many people. If you want to stop bloodshedding on the front line, that's the right strategy. You just attack immediately, you know, all of the, you know, power infrastructure, so everything stops, and basically your enemy surrenders, right? They just don't do it right way. They draw it out. They you know, Ukraine adjusts, and it turns into, basically you need to do it really quick to be successful. And the way they do it is it's allowing Ukrainian side to adjust, adopt, and actually be able to continue surviving and continue the fight.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually, you know, poorly executed. Like it's a bad way of doing it, but it's sort of step from a Russian. If you put yourself in the Russian shoes, objectively, that's a right step for them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're doing right stuff for themselves. Yeah, and this may, you know, at the same time, it looks like from what I'm seeing, people adopt quite. I'm not saying they have, it's great, but like they do adopt quite well in Ukraine. Like I'm not saying, oh, I want this to be happening, it's wonderful, but like, do people do adopt? They change, they you know, they have all, everybody has this power generators, they try to survive, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, another different question. I think this must be our last question. I had to go soon. How can people like me, average person, outside the country, outside Ukraine, help Ukraine?
Good question. I would say, and I said this before, never help Ukrainian government, it's gonna get just stolen. uh Find individual people who you can help, like individual people, like, you know, like, you know, like Ivan and Andrei, and just go and make sure that you know, it's hard, you know, to be honestly. Also, I'm thinking, like, you know, you're in Australia, how do you know, how are you gonna know it, in a way? I don't have a good answer for that, I'll be honest with you, because I just, you know, it's like, how do you know that these people are honest, not just gonna waste your resources, and it's gonna go into, you know, into toilet? Like, this is, I'm just thinking like about directly helping people in Ukraine. um you know, you know what I would also say, like, in that, that's, you know, maybe it's totally different approach, but like, you know, a bunch of people got together, and let's say right now there's a problem with all of this, like, you know, electricity infrastructure, and, you know, create like free spaces where people can, you know, go there and have this, you know, have electricity, right? You know what I mean? Like, you know, provide for some whatever village or half of the village, 10 houses, 2 houses, I don't know, but like, just kind of like passively, I'm gonna send money somewhere, it doesn't work. That money just gets stolen, unfortunately. This is reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I don't want to sort of say much about it, because, you know, I don't want to, like, you know, people like outside of Ukraine saying like, okay, well, then we shouldn't be doing anything. That's not correct. It's just, to do right things, it's not easy. It's not going to be just sitting on the couch and, you know, sending $10 to Ukraine and feeling like, okay, great, I'm helping Ukraine. No, I don't know. Also developing some military stuff, you know what I mean? Like, I would say like one of the big things that like I would say that could change significantly. And the reason I'm saying is because I see engine in your background is actually like creating UAV that is something similar to our LAN 10. That would be like single biggest contribution to Ukraine, to Ukrainian sort of future and winning on the war, because there's still no good UAV and not in large numbers. Because it, you know, our land, if you remember, I was saying it's cheap, it's primitive, it's cheap, but it has good technical sort of specification capabilities. It's actually pretty good. Like I would say from engineering, this is should be like taught in engineering schools, like how like people did excellent thing for the job that is cheap, quickly to do, easy to do, but it has very good technical specification capabilities. And in a way, it's very hard to achieve, you know, engineering wise, but they did. And so something like that, that would be the biggest contribution um, to help Ukraine. That like those UAVs, because right now Ukrainian artillery is still blind to a great extent. I'm saying it's like they have some eyes, but it's not where it needs to be at all, not even close. And you see, this is ninth month, you know, 10 months of the war, and not even anything by Ukraine government. Nothing has been done by Ukraine government. Haven't even started anything. They will never start because it's easier to steal money. They incompetent, lack intelligence, and so all they know is how to steal. I don't have resources to do anything like that personally, because I would have done that. But if there's enough people get together, I think it is doable, and that's the realistic way how I see how to truly help Ukraine. Because you know, sending $5 or $10, it just goes into nowhere. Basically, just most of it is just misused and stolen and used in a stupid ways and don't help in not helping in true meaningful way. So in a way, it's like people think that like helping is easy. Actually, helping is not easy. You really need to put effort into it.
Mhm.
Sorry for the long answer, and probably not like answer that's kind of like easy. Oh, okay, just send to this account, you know, $10, and things gonna get great. No, I mean, like, no, that's not gonna happen. Helping is not easy. That's what like most people don't understand. It's not about sending $10 from the couch.
Mhm. Yeah, I haven't donated much.
Or doing something like, you know, if you know anything about, but like, you know, at the same time, it's not like you can just, because you really need help like right there on the ground. And I don't know of any good organization that I would say, oh, I trust these people, that they're not going to abuse the money or resources or whatever. so in a way, like it requires, or like it's basically like a group of people organizing, and there is one who actually travels there and does something, whatever that is, you know, whatever that is, you know, even like, you know, a few expert in repairing engines, like, you know, setting up shop to repair engines, you know what I mean? It's like, but it requires actual involvement and help and being there. It's not going to happen, you know, remotely in a way. I don't see how that's going to really help in a meaningful way.
Mhm. I have
I don't know.
found
Maybe I'm wrong,
at
but
least one guy I know. He's volunteer and he's going around Ukraine, and he's he's delivering uh, power generators for little hospitals all over, and making little
for you
videos of
breaking
it.
up really badly. You're breaking
Okay.
up really badly.
I'm sorry. I'm.
Say
It's
it again. He's delivering power generators, and then I didn't hear the rest.
uh, delivering power generations to little hospitals near front lines. So I have been helping
Yeah,
him.
well, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Or kindergartens or things like, I would say in all of this, like the ones who suffer the most are children. Like, you know, I don't know, focus, like, you know, that's what I would even focus, because children are the future. and helping like this, schools or orphanages or whatever, like children related. Power generators is definitely like great idea. There's no question about it. I mean, and maybe that's a way to help. Is like the guy, give him the money, and so because he's going there, so it's much harder to fool him, right? Versus if you just send someone $10, it's like okay, it's gonna go to nowhere. So better, I think that's maybe the way to help is to help like someone who is helping and help him financially. That's all. I know, or whatever way, other way you can help that person.
Yep. Okay, we had to end it here.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's do it again in a few months, maybe January, February.
Yeah. Let's catch up. Yeah. Because we really didn't talk about the fighting on the ground. We were more like sort of high level, sort of strategic issues. But I think because it's becoming more, I think as time passes by, it's becoming more clear that the strategic situation is more important than actual day-to-day fighting on the ground, because that strategy will determine the future, the outcome of that fighting that we're seeing, sort of more tactical fighting on the ground. Anyways, I know you need to go, you need to run, and so I'll let you go.
Okay, thanks for hanging out.
Thank you. It's pleasure and it's honor for me to you're asking me to share my thoughts, and I appreciate that.
Excellent. Well,
okay,
have a good
one.
Bye.
You too. Bye.